Well, the end of April is always not an auspicious, but an inauspicious and a very strange time, at least for me, because many bizarre and ominous anniversaries take place in April. In the 1990s, April 19th and 20th is the anniversary of Ruby Ridge, the final end of the siege at Waco, Oklahoma City, and Columbine. It's also Patriots Day, Tax Day, and probably many hundreds of other events that I wouldn't remember. And, I mean, any day you pick, you're going to have lots of anniversaries. But all those events are similar because they deal with one level or another with uh, sinister government involvement in the society at large, and also increases in government involvement in the society at large. And it's for me, it's a very interesting thing because my initial skepticism about the state, from being something that was benign and even beneficent to something that was at least worthy of suspicion, was instigated by one of these events, or at least a reflection upon one of these events. And that was what happened at Waco. Now, when what happened at Waco happened, I didn't take too much stock in it. I was 10, and I didn't change my views at the time. But later, I learned about it, and by the time Columbine happened in 1999, I was very suspicious of the government. And I recall a few weeks after that happened, our school decided they were going to do a non-violence pledge where everyone was going to go and put their handprint on a piece of paper and sign it and say that they wouldn't pledge to violence. And I objected and said that I thought the whole thing was just a thinly veiled anti-Second Amendment, anti-right to self-defense ploy, and that I would not take part in it, which it wasn't required, so it wasn't like I was really bucking the system. But I did tell my teachers, like, okay, it's your time to go, and I'm like, I'm not doing that, and this is why. And I don't really typically make videos about any of these events because most of them have been covered in other documentaries, and I'll usually just refer people. So anyone who has not seen Waco, The Rules of Engagement needs to see that. That's a great documentary. Ruby Ridge, I don't know that there really is anything particularly good. I don't know if there's any particularly good documentary about Oklahoma City. There are a number of good books about it. Tim McVeigh's lawyer wrote a good book called Others Unknown, and a new book just came out that I just actually got the email today. I pre-ordered it and it just came out. But anyone who goes onto Anti-War Radio, Scott Horton has interviewed most of the principals related to Oklahoma City. He's probably got close to 20 hours now of interviews with the FBI agents, lawyers, attorneys, relatives, reporters, and I mean, if I hadn't listened to them all already, I think it would be worthwhile to go through and listen to them all. I wasn't going to make a video, and then I just because it's the anniversary, some of this stuff got covered. And there's one documentary about Columbine that I'm aware of. It's called The Columbine Cause. I came across it a number of years ago, and it's a pretty low budget affair. If you look on YouTube, though, you will be able to find it. Just type The Columbine Cause, and it's put out by a guy named Evan Long. He's got a big long beard, or at least he used to. I don't know if he still does. And anyway, he just got re-interviewed, and I listened to it again, and it kind of got me thinking. And I'm sort of combining all of those events into this one video because it seems really hard to go through this period and not say something. One thing that happened that's kind of subdued interest in these topics is 9/11 happened. And 9/11 was such a big deal among conspiracy theorists and among anti-government people that really, if you came to minarchism or if you came to conspiracy theorism or whatever, post 9/11, there's a very good chance you would not really know very much about these events. They're famous events that most people in the United States, especially even if you were a kid, would remember. Uh, Although I've now started to encounter people who are young enough who really don't know what Waco was. If I say Waco, they don't know what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about like adults who are in their 20s, which I found amazing. But it's true. Now, not everyone's like that, but uh, uh, of all these events, all of them are ones that I have more questions on than I have answers. With the Branch Davidians, I think it's the easiest to tell because that's the most evidence. Clearly, they were murdered. The precise motives as to why is not clear, and I don't think we'll ever know. It is possible that it was an accident, although I think it was intentional. I think that there is an I think that the initial raid against the Branch Davidians, which was in February of 1993, was really a publicity stunt. That's not really that hard to imagine. That fits the MO of the ATF. It's a publicity stunt that went horribly wrong, and that the government was basically guilty of homicide. Because of that, they realized this and decided that the only way that they could get off the hook is if the Branch Davidians never got to tell their side of the story, and so they uh, made damn sure that did their best to make sure no Branch Davidians survived to talk about it, and destroyed the other main piece of evidence, which was their home, referred to as a compound in the media. And this resulted in a fire and the execution, the very cold-hearted and bloodthirsty execution of most of the Davidians. A few of them survived, and they were all prosecuted to the full extent of the law, although it's my understanding that within the last year or two, the last of them have finally been released. But certainly no roundup of all the murderers on the government side has ever taken place or ever will. Uh, it's almost to their, I hate to say it's to their credit, but some of the surviving Davidians have even gone so far as to say they forgive everybody and they just want to get it past them. So they are better men than me, I guess, because I don't feel that, I feel that justice should be done. But anyway, Oklahoma City, again, I don't know what the motive would be. I don't know if the government caused it, if the government just provocateured it, if the government just knew it was going to happen and let it happen. It's one of those three. Timothy McVeigh is an interesting man. He obviously worked for the government because he was in the Army in the first Gulf War. He was clearly not the only person present when the bomb went off. There is enormous evidence there was a so-called John Doe number 2. It was the biggest manhunt in FBI history. For days or even weeks, the news is who was the other guy he was with, and there was reason to assume that there was another guy because dozens of witnesses, including the guys who rented the Ryder truck to them, said he was with another person. And then just one day, the FBI said we had it all wrong. There wasn't another John Doe number 2, and we've got our man. And surely Timothy McVeigh is guilty. Timothy McVeigh had a role in the Oklahoma City bombing that would be some degree accessory or either guilty of first-degree murder, and the fact that he was put to death sits well with me. But he wasn't alone, and he made he's a very interesting figure. If you read his lawyer's book, the way he acted around his lawyer is very bizarre. He basically did not want to, he wanted to plead innocent or not guilty. He wanted to have a trial, but he wanted to give the impression that he was guilty, if that makes any sense at all. I mean, he told his lawyer to release stories to the New York Times claiming that he was guilty. So the New York Times ran stories saying attorneys in or people close to McVeigh say McVeigh admitted to it. And McVeigh's lawyer planted those stories on McVeigh's urging. But then McVeigh didn't say, well, I did. He didn't say, though, I had done it. He said, I want you to plant the stories that said I had done it. I don't understand that at all. I would speculate and I'd come up with an interesting story, but I don't know the cause. Columbine, it's even worse. Columbine may have been just the mass homicide that it was made out to be, save one very glaring cover-up. which is covered very well in the documentary. Now, the documentary, documentaries can be made convincing, and they can edit and they can show or say anything they want through omission or clever or even just lying. I mean, but the basis of the Columbine cause is basically just the government report. The county where Columbine happens, Jefferson County, Colorado, after a couple years, mostly because of the activities of locals there who, were agitated because they had they knew people who were affected. The county released at least a large body of records it had of its investigation, largely comprised of interviews of witnesses, of which there were many, 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 many. And although this report was surely not the only, or the totality of evidence, even within this report, it was evident that something was going on. Basically, uh, Eric, uh, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were certainly involved and certainly acting as shooters. However, the interesting point is that many of the eyewitnesses fingered not only them, but several other people. One in particular, I think his name was Michael Collins, but I could be remembering that wrong. And this is interesting because, eyewitnesses can obviously be mistaken. They can be frightened, and it's real common for them, if they're assaulted by somebody who they've never met, to guess their weight wrong, to guess their height wrong, that sort of thing. But when you actually know somebody, it's very unusual to completely misidentify. And I would ask, in this situation, the victims and the alleged perpetrators were all schoolmates, or even classmates. So even if they weren't in the same grade, they would have gone to the same school. Now, I don't know about all my subscribers, and maybe I went to a slightly smaller school than normal, but there isn't anyone in my school who, if they had shot at me, I would have been unable to know for sure who they were. And when you have multiple witnesses identifying the same person, that is very convincing evidence that they're involved. That's compelling at the very least. What apparently happened is, in the first round of Columbine happened in April. So in April and May, these police departments, the various agencies, did round after round of interviews with everybody. I mean, the people in the school, the people around the school, people who weren't even there that day but who might have known something. And through this evidence, several people were identified, in addition to Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, as being responsible, or at least partially responsible. Among other interesting facts, like gunfire being heard in areas where Dylan and Klebold weren't, gunfire being heard in areas after Dylan and Klebold were officially dead, and quite a few other seemingly anomalous things, which I guess each one individually could be attributed to a mistake, but all of them put together makes it sound like there's more to the story. Anyway, about 6 months after these first rounds of interviews, that fall, like in September, October, the police went through again, and this time they had a narrative. They weren't going around asking people what had happened and just copiously recording it. They were saying, well, if someone said, well, I saw, somebody other than Harris or Klebold, the police would say, oh, are you sure that's who you saw? And they said, yes, I'm absolutely positive. And they said, well, wasn't it really Eric Harris or Dylan Klebold? And they basically arm twisted these people, coerced, you could say, to change or alter their testimony, which they didn't all do. Some of them refused to change their testimonies. Others eventually begrudgingly did. But the clear indication was they had come up with a narrative, and the narrative was that these two guys had done it, and the fact that there were others who were clearly involved was, for whatever reason, extirpated. Now, I don't know why that would be. The people who were fingered, it's not like it was Bill Clinton. It's not like anybody was saying Bill Clinton was in there shooting people, or Janet Reno, or Eric Holder, or anything like that. If that had been the case, then we would all know, obviously, they're covering up to protect, Clinton or whoever. But the people that they identified were just other students or former students. I think one of them was somebody who would have graduated like the year before. Other so-called members of the so-called Trenchcoat Mafia. and I really don't know why. The only thing I can think of is that they were involved, and that the only reason they wouldn't want to charge them with a crime is because they were conspicuously alive. And if you charge a living person with a crime, especially back then before Obama came into office, you have to give them a trial. You can't keep them in prison forever. Imagine how times have come since then. It's been, what, 13 years? I guess nowadays they wouldn't be bothered by this, but uh, they'd have to put them on trial, and then who knows what kind of information would come out in the trial. I don't know. There's nothing directly implicated in the event that screams government culpability. Even the argument that they use it to advance gun control, sure, but that doesn't mean that they caused it. You know, there's nothing illegal about a feckless politician passing gun control after a tragedy. Uh, and these kids, it's unclear how they, it's not like, unless we were going to prove that Carolyn McCarthy or Chuck Schumer were secretly pulling the strings to make him do it, or Bill Clinton or whoever, they wouldn't be at any risk whatsoever from a trial. But that's the only reason I can think of, is they didn't want there to be a trial, and the reason why is because they didn't want too many questions asked. And why is that? Well, I don't know. We can only speculate. Now, if that's the case, it would make sense. Look, Dylan and Klebold take part in this attack for whatever reason. They get killed by their co-conspirators, and then everything gets blamed on them, so there's no trial. And the fact that people saw third parties going around murdering people is irrelevant, I guess. I really am very curious about what's happened to these other shooters since then, if they're still around. You know, do they work at the local car wash? Are they kindergarten teachers? I don't know. I'm actually trying to ask the guy who made the Columbine Calls documentary, but I don't think he knows. The other interesting thing here, in addition to the clear attempt to craft a narrative months later, is that there are interesting things about the school and its going-ons. Basically, the idea that there might be a shooting was being circulated, and some of the students had even made videos about that actually happening before it happened, which is very, very eerie. The other thing is, a very prominent psychologist in the FBI had children who went to this school. I forget his name. He had a French name. And one of them knew Harris or Klebold and may have even taken part in making this video. So that is interesting that a FBI psychologist, a prominent one, I don't want to say he's the head of their unit or anything, but a prominent FBI psychiatrist would have such a deep connection to the school, and then his playmates go around offing their classmates. But I stress here that I'm just speculating. I don't really know, and no one really does. There wasn't really a trial. They had hearings, pretty minor. The kind of run-of-the-mill conspiracy theory is, well, this is the sort of thing they do to pass gun control. But really, there hasn't been any gun control, really. There's been very, very little because of Columbine. There's even less because of Virginia Tech. There's none because of Virginia. In fact, there's a backlash. Now, when these things happen, there's just a hue and cry that we have to pass right to carry laws and that sort of thing. And I know that the gun control people out there like to use them for that, but you know, the Chuck Schumers and the Carolyn McCarthys and the Sarah Bradys, but I don't see their fingerprints on actually having caused them. And so, if the government is actually causing them, that doesn't seem to be the main reason. Because if that was the reason, then Bill Clinton would have been out front and center the next day, and something would have been passed. If they're going to go, if the power elites are going to go and start killing people openly like that, then they would have their game together enough to get a fucking gun control law passed the next day, if that's what they wanted. To me, although part of me says maybe that's the reason, another part of me says, I don't know. I mean, if that was what they were going for, then why didn't they get it? I don't. A lot of the conspiracy theorists like to say, well, this is the cult, this is devil worship. There is there is really devil worship in the United States, and it really does result in homicide sometime. And anyone who would like to learn about it, I recommend the book The Ultimate Evil, by Mare Tari, which covers the summit, which is a book that really is an investigation of the Son of Sam murders by David Berkowitz in the 70s in New York City. But this Oklahoma City thing, or not Oklahoma City, pardon me, Columbine does not seem like that really at all. It seems like a group of kids decided to go on a mass shooting and kill lots of people, and there's no motive at all. And even the fact that they were on drugs would only be a secondary reason, because lots of people are on drugs and they don't go and do that exactly. Why would the government want to facilitate that? I don't know. I don't understand what that could possibly... If that was going to benefit them in some way, I don't see how it did. Except in maybe a very vague way where we feel like we need to be protected when scary stuff like that happens. But that's a pretty amorphous, nebulous benefit to risk so much on. So I don't really know. All these events are ones I have a lot more questions about. All of them are horrible crimes. I mean, Waco, we're talking about almost 80 people killed. Oklahoma City, we're talking about, what, 165, maybe more, because there were, if anyone who reads about it, you'll learn that there are extra body parts that don't fit any of the corpses that they found, indicating that there were other people killed, likely some of the bombers. Yeah, there's a whole leg. For those who've never heard this before, there's a whole leg that first they attributed to one victim, and then they found that victim's leg, and then I go, oh, crap. Anyway, 160 there. Columbine's, it's only like, it's less than 15, I think. Ruby Ridge is a little bit different, but they were talking about a woman, a son, a couple other people. Fortunately, Randy Weaver survived. That's amazing, by the way. But these are... I'm more interested in these events than I am in 9/11 still, even though that was a much bigger thing. I feel like these are like the proto new stage government. And I don't mean that in the New World Order kind of sense, just like the chrysalis, like, you know, when a butterfly is in a cocoon still, but it's actually become a butterfly, it just hasn't opened its wings yet. I feel like the 90s were when that butterfly, but by butterfly I mean totalitarian police state, it was still in a cocoon, but it was a butterfly in a cocoon. And it was 9/11 that kind of burst it, and it's, you know, in some degree of opening its horrible bat wings now. But these earlier events, I think, show it that it's there, even if it hasn't spread its wings to fly. If that's not too simple an allegory. But these events, unfortunately, there's just so little. Most of them have, each one has a couple little cadre of investigators who plot along. Like in Oklahoma City, there's a lawyer named Jesse Trenadu, or Kenneth Trenadu. One of the Trenadus, he's a lawyer. The FBI probably killed somebody in their investigation, in their search for John Doe number 2. They thought they found John Doe number 2, and they beat the crap out of him, and he died. And it turned out he wasn't John Doe number 2. He was somebody who matched his description. And as it turned out to them, his brother was a lawyer, and his brother has been trying to figure out what happened to his brother for now, what, 20 years? 19 years, something like that. 18. And, sorry, 13. So it doesn't matter. And so him and a couple other reporters, but it's just like a tiny breadcrumbs of information are just slowly coming out. And when you realize that there must be the terabytes of documentation somewhere scattered all over the place, you just wonder, and even if you had all that, could you really understand the events? Unfortunately, no, as much as I want to. So anyway, anyone who's not really looked into these events, I highly recommend looking into Waco. And I would recommend the book The Davidian Massacre by Carol Moore. It's either Carol Moore or Carol Howe. And the documentary Waco's Rules of Engagement. I'd look up on Anti-War Radio under the Scott Horton Show, the Oklahoma City archive, but a good place to start is Others Unknown by Tim McVeigh's lawyer. Also, there's a new book, like I just said, that just came out, and I pre-ordered it, and I got an email today saying that it just got sent, and that's kind of the culmination of the main reporters on that who've been covering it for years and years and years. I'd recommend that. And for Columbine, there's not as much to go on, but I would recommend the Columbine Cause. And the guy who made it has done quite a few interviews after that, so I listened to them, although they won't reveal all that much more. But April is always, I get apprehensive in April every year. I always wonder, is something going to happen now? Because for a long time, stuff did happen, and it was always bad. It was always a harbinger of a meaner Leviathan. And that's always something to be nervous about. So, all right, that's it.